Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk Race, a conversation with author, activist, and mother, and many other great things, Jodie Patterson. My name is Jocelyn Tran, and I am a children's librarian and Let's Talk Race member at Richland Library. I'm so excited about this evening's author discussion, and I'm so glad that all of you were able to join us. Even though this is a virtual event, we would like to acknowledge that Richland Library locations are built on the traditional territory of the Congaree and Eastern Cherokee people. Richland Library's Let's Talk Race team was formed in 2016, formerly Social Awareness Task Force, and has been recognized nationally for its efforts surrounding race, equity, and inclusion. The Let's Talk Race team's purpose is to create opportunities for civic engagement, build community connections, and encourage courageous conversations. We have facilitated discussions with over 3,000 participants and hosted more than 80 forums and events for the community, staff, partners, and other organizations to date. We are constantly working on examining race and racism and how it intersects with identity and in communities. We want to bring in as many perspectives and stories to widen our vision and inform our anti-racism efforts. So we are excited to have Jodie Patterson here with us this evening. Ms. Patterson is an author, activist, beauty explorer, and mother of five, and she holds the position of chair of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation Board, our nation's largest LGBT organization. Her memoir, The Bold World, a memoir of family and transformation, was hailed by Alice Walker as marvelous. Her second book, Born Ready, the true story of a boy named Penelope, allows her children's voices to be heard. As a globally recognized activist, she speaks on topics of radical parenting, identity, and gender. We are equally excited to have our moderator here tonight. Naomi Simmons Thorne is a graduate student and teacher activist. She studies at the University of South Carolina, where she is completing a master's in secondary education with focuses on literature, literacy, and composition. Naomi works with students kindergarten through 8th grade as a reading interventionist for the South Carolina Public Charter School District. She has served as a fellow at the Department of Education funded research institution for Scholars of Equity, as well as the Center for Minority Serving Institutions at the Rutgers Graduate School of Education. Her work promotes critical anti-bias education and prejudice reduction pedagogies for advancing LGBTQ+ student and educator equity. There will be some time for audience questions toward the end of the program. And if you'd like to submit a question for Ms. Patterson or Ms. Simmons Thorne, please use the Q&A feature and we will respond to as many questions as we can. Thank you for being with us. And I will now pass it over to Ms. Simmons Thorne and Ms. Patterson.
Hi there, how are you?
Hi, Naomi. How are you?
Hi, Ms. Patterson, I'm doing well, and yourself?
I'm good. Please call me Jodie.
Jodie, yes.
Yes.
Hi, Jodie. I have to say, first and foremost, it's such a privilege and an honor to be just in dialogue with you today. I've had a chance to read your most recent book, and I have to say, like, as a reading interventionist, I read all kinds of children's books, all kinds of children's literature. And this one, I don't know, it just really hit home in a way that I don't think any children's book I've ever read ever had. And children's books are really amazing. People think that people engage them in a really patronizing way, but there's so much to get out of children's books as an adult, and you can engage with them in such authentic ways. And I had that kind of engagement actually when I read your book. And in fact, I remember after reading it, I took it to my roommate and was like, okay, you're living with a teacher, please, like, you have to humor me. Literally read them the children's book, just like front to back. Like it's an amazing book. And so definitely want us to get around to discussing it. And I also want us to get to talking about some of your work as an activist and a public figure, and also some of like the more autobiographical things you have to tell us as well, especially as it pertains to your first book, which we'll also get to as well. So before we get too far ahead, I think a good place to start would just be hearing a little bit more about you, Jodie, as an author, as a human being, as a mom, and all the other amazing things that you do. And just tell us a little bit about how you came about moving into this work that you're doing.
Naomi, I am well, first of all, I can listen to your voice all night long. I don't need to speak. You have the nicest voice. So thank you for hosting this and moderating, and thank you for reading my books. Writing a children's book for me was, like you said, more than writing a small thing. First of all, I have to tell you, I have a fire alarm going off in the background because I have yet to change the batteries because I'm a mom of 5 and I just haven't gotten around to the battery thing yet. So you're going to hear it going off tonight, but there is no fire alarm. So writing a children's book was a big deal for me because it really looked at the topic that I'm interested in, which is race and gender and identity. And it brought it in its most triumphant form. So a lot of what I've been dealing with is my development over the years, and adults bring a lot of heaviness to this idea of gender and this idea of race. And so for me, when I was thinking of my personal story, there were a lot of twists and turns. There were a lot of tragic parts and sad parts. But when I was writing the children's book, I only wanted it to be triumphant and powerful and beautiful. So I guess when you say, when you ask, who am I? I'm a lot of things. I'm a mom of 5. I think for me, that's one of the most powerful titles that I hold, mothering. I've also been in the music industry. I've been in the fashion industry. I worked as a book editor. I worked in nightlife. I was even a circus acrobat. I don't know if you saw that on my resume, but I was a circus acrobat and a competitive gymnast. But what I think holds the most weight is mothering. Because I feel like that job really kind of gets to the point and gets to the matter of things. And when I talk about mothering, I'm not just speaking of the biological children that I birthed or the adopted child that I raised, but I'm thinking of mothering communities as well. I was raised by civil rights activists. My grandmother was instrumental in changing the laws in the South. My uncle is Gil Scott-Heron, the musician who wrote The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. So my whole upbringing was around activism and sort of seeing the blind spots in our society and righting the wrongs. And I feel like as a mom, I can do a lot of that. I can do that within my home, but I can also bring mothering to the boardrooms that I sit on and the communities that I work in. I have recently, in the last several years, taken on the position of chair of the board of the Human Rights Campaign Foundation. And that was something new for me. I mean, I've never been on a board the size of HRC's board. I've never been responsible for that many folks and that much of a budget. But I actually brought my mothering to the boardroom at the Human Rights Campaign. It's just something that I think, especially now at this time where there's so much division, there's so much destruction, there's a lot of death, mothering is the answer. And again, not in the small form, but mothering with a capital M, as in leadership. So that's me. I'm a woman who takes the job seriously to mother not only her children, but to mother communities.
Yes, so you're a jack of so many trades. You just had such a full life, and I really appreciate you giving us a piece of it and giving us a window into it just as an author. And so you spoke about mothering a lot, and so that's a perfect segue, I think, into your most recent book, Born Ready. So for the folks who are attending right now who may or may not know about this book, can you tell us a little bit about Born Ready? And also, I'm not sure if, I'm sure we have some people who have not seen it. So can you also like just share some of the illustrations
I would love
too, because the illustrations are beautiful. So can you tell us a little bit about the book yeah, and also show us some of those like great illustrations that you have in there.
I thank you for asking me to do that. It's one of the, I'm just so proud of this book. So I'm gonna back up a minute. I wrote this first book, which is called The Bold World. And it is my memoir, and it's really about my transformation and my transition from being a woman who knew only a part of life to a woman who knows more of life now. I mean, still learning, but there were millions of people that I wasn't seeing, and including my own son, who is a Black trans boy. And so The Bold World was sort of this very like epic story of a family, a Black family. I take the family back down south, multiple generations back, and I look at the way we were taught around gender. And then as an adult, I look at how I was thinking about gender, and then how I unlearned it and how I learned it again in a broader sense. And then when I wrote that first book, a lot of parents were saying, oh, I can't wait to share this book with my 5-year-old child. And I said, whoa, don't, definitely, it's not necessarily for the 5-year-old. It's particularly not page 69. Like there's some things in there that are just for adults, right? And literally on page 69, it's just not, it's not a kid's book. Young adult book for sure, but not a young children's book. And so I wanted to write something, one that families could share from as young as, toddler age, all the way up through the generations. I wanted to write something with my children that gave their voice and their memories and their joy around the last 10 years of our lives. And so we wrote together Born Ready, the true story of a boy named Penelope. And the lead character is Penelope, a Black trans boy. And I'll give you all the good stuff in the middle, but I will tell you, he is triumphant. And at the end, he wins the gold medal. And that to me is the story, because so many stories around our trans folks are tragic or scary or sad or involve all kinds of manipulation from cisgender folks. And this story is literally in Penelope's voice, and he wins in the end. And his whole community, including his siblings and his teachers and his friends, support him. And so it's really like about how an entire community can shift for someone we love. What I really like is that the illustrator, Charnel Pinkley, really captured all of our family's visuals. So I don't know if you can see it, but there's the bossy sister, Georgia. There's the know-it-all brother, Cassius. There's busy mama. There's strong papa. And then there's baby Othello. And over in the end over here is Penel wondering when folks are going to have time for him. I don't want to go through the whole, I could go through the whole thing, but I want to show you, there's a page that I really love where Penel is transferring energy and information to mama, because Penel, the child, knows more than mama knows. And that was something that was important in the book, that there's, and I believe this in real life, that there are ways that people transfer information, that objects transfer information, that the earth can transfer information, and children can transfer information to adults. They often have more wisdom than adults. And so that was something that I wanted to share in the book, that Penel knew who he was, and he was going to have to take on the responsibility of teaching his own mother and then teaching his own principal. And that's something that we're not used to, where children are teaching adults.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I just say, the best thing about this book is that it is starring Penel or Penelope, but his siblings are in the book as well. And the whole family, I thought maybe some of the kids would be a little jealous seeing a whole book around one kid, but they were so excited. They flipped the pages and they're like, oh, that does look like me. I did say that. I'm so happy they drew me that way. So there's like a pride that the entire gang of kids have over the book.
Thank you. And I actually want to pick up on something that you said. You said that that what's important about this story, or at least one of the things that's important about it, is that it's a triumphant one, and that it is. And that made me think about the need for diversity of kinds of stories and kinds of perspectives that we see when it comes to LGBTQ representation, especially in children's media. And so we do have our tragic stories, and those stories are important and they resonate and reflect the lives of so many people. But we also need our triumphant stories as well, whether that's in terms of representation or whether that's in terms of something aspirational that young people and anyone else who is participating in the journey of a trans person's life can also like look up to and see as a reference point. And so I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about what you think about your book in the context of this new explosion of LGBTQ children's representation in media, especially Black LGBTQ children's representation in media and children's books specifically. So we have some really exciting ones that have like recently come out. We have with Juliana's the Mermaid.
Love that one.
Yes, we have When Aiden Became a Brother, and a couple of other ones. And so how do you see your book contributing to this new wave of representation? And what do you think about this publishing trend in the broader context?
Well, I'm glad that, I mean, I didn't know it was an explosion. I am, it's past time. It's past time for that kind of explosion to have happened. And I'll take it if it's actually a fact. When we were growing up, my mom would always find the books that had characters that looked like us. And in fact, there's a thing you could do where you could make your own book. Like you could actually write in and then you could design a book for your children with their names and their skin color, and the storyline would sort of like match with the way that the mom would want the story to match, right? Her own children. And so my mom would either craft the stories to match us, or she would find the 5 books that were out there that resembled us. And then sometimes she would even tell us, she'd make up her own story. So in our house, when it was bedtime, Rapunzel had cornrows. So she would let down her cornrows, right? And all of the princes had afros. And all of the queens had skin like ours. And this was my mother sitting with us and telling the stories as she knew we needed to hear them so that we would grow into adults that had a deep sense of self-worth and a deep sense of pride and a knowledge that wherever we are in this world, we belong. And so, if the publishing company has caught up with my mom, I'm glad. If the publishing company has not yet, I tell you that parents will find those 5 books. And it is our job as parents and as libraries to find those 5 books. We can't say there aren't enough. Get however many are out there and purchase them, because that signals to the publisher that they are valued by the consumer. I'm happy that my book is available, and I want it to get into the hands of Black trans kids. Like if a Black trans kid reads Penel's story, I will be so happy. It's written, it's written for the trans kid, and it of course can be read by anyone. But I think it's important to know that when I was writing it, I wasn't thinking about the larger world. I was thinking about my world. And I think that's important when you're telling stories, like to be, without the gaze of other folks. My family exists. And I wanted to show it, not as you might see us, not responding to the way you might think of us, but really how we are and how we see ourselves in the life that I know. And I don't want it to ever go forgotten. So this book is really like, I'm hoping, like you said, there's a trend for publishers to diversify their stories. And if not, there will be this mom and there will be, the few of us out here pushing our stories further and further.
There's 2 quotes in the book. If we can, I'd love to just expand on a little bit. So there's one when Penelope's when we're at the dinner table and Penelope is talking about her resolute sense that she is a boy. It's really interesting because Penelope is telling his brother that Penelope's telling his brother that I'm a boy, and then his brother says,
Yeah.
you can't
Just
you can't
become. Yeah.
exactly, you can't become a boy, you have to be born one. And I love that the mom says this isn't it doesn't have to make sense, it's about love. And then there's another part in the book too that I also love, that I would love if we can also discuss a little bit more too. It's this part of the book when the mom finished telling Penelope, finished telling the family about Penelope, and then the mom tells Penelope that when he goes to school tomorrow, that's his responsibility. So I was wondering if you could kind of like just expand on those two points in the book. I love those two moments.
So, Penel is not the only child in the family. And so there are a lot of different identities and different truths in my own family, in this very, intimate group of people. And for me, I feel like my family is like a little bustling city, because I have folks, I have a trans identified, I have a gender queer identified, I have a cisgender, I have straight, I have perhaps things I don't even know yet from within my own city of 5 children. And so a lot of people think that my advocacy is for Penelope only. And that would be favoritism. My advocacy is for across the board for all of my children. So as much as I stand with Penelope's identity as being trans, I have a son in real life who believes that the science of gender does not prove trans realities or trans lives. So here's my own child. He's 15 at this point, but he doesn't believe that the science proves gender nonconformity. And so, in the beginning, I tried to make everyone feel the same way, make everyone see life the same way. Once I realized that and understood Penelope to be trans, I wanted everyone to accept that. And so I pushed and pushed and pushed. It didn't happen. Like, I can't get my kids to follow me. But what I can do is create an environment where everyone's truth can be placed in front of us. We can talk it out in long form conversation. And so I've decided that we don't have to agree, but we have to disagree with decorum. So Big Brother says, Penel, I love you. I'll always use the right pronoun, but I don't think trans identities are scientifically proven. And physiologically, you are female. And then with this process that I've laid out for my children, where we have to disagree with decorum, Penel then says his piece, which is, look, it's not science. I'm here. I've proven it. Trans people exist because I am here. And that's the end of it. And God has made me this way. And then the scientist says, well, I don't think that God is proven either. So we have a lot to debate on. And this has been going on for 10 years. And they're no closer to agreeing. And as I said, the goal is not to agree in my house. And so the non-believer scientist has been living with the trans identified right person. And although they don't see eye to eye on the language around it, they have a full life together. They eat dinner together, they play basketball together. And my goal is to hopefully when they grow up, not to have them vote against each other and hurt each other. So, when Mama says in the book, you don't have to understand it, this is about love. Oftentimes families or communities or even cities are full of diversity, and those identities can rub up against each other, and that's okay. The goal for me in my family, but also in the community, the larger community, is to disagree, to have our unique identities and our unique positionings, and to still be able to shoot some hoops together and eat dinner together at night. So it so far, and this is not theoretical, this is actually happening in my house right now. So that was that. My simple, I was simply addressing the fact that we are different, period. And yet there will be love. And then I think the second part was, what was the other part that you mentioned? The other part?
You dovetailed them. So you talked about both of them.
It doesn't have to understand. And then what was the other one?
The other one was when you told Penelope that when he goes to school, it's his responsibility.
Oh, you know what that, so yes, I did bring that up a little bit, but my mom was really, she really gave us the space to have certain areas of our lives that we were responsible for. And school was one of those areas. Like, you know, it was our responsibility as children to figure out the dynamics of our classroom, the dynamics of our teacher. She was there to support us, but we were really, that was our little mini world. And she gave us that freedom and that responsibility to go into each classroom and find ourselves, you know. As a freshman, you might be stumbling, but as a junior, sophomore, junior, senior, you will grow. And it was our job to grow. And so I took that learning that my mom taught, the wisdom of my mother, and I gave that to Penelope. And I said, I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you, but school is your responsibility. So go talk to your friends, go talk to your teacher, go talk to your principal. And Penel did. He told his friends, I am a boy. And he told his principal, I am a boy. And anyone who asked, he said, yes, I'm positive I am a boy. And you know, the entire school, which is in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, a lot of Caribbean, a lot of West Indian, supported Penel. They learned with him, they grew with him, and they became sometimes, in some cases, bigger, stronger advocates of the LGBT community than Penel. Penel sometimes just like wants to go play basketball, and his friends are like, yeah, but there's work to be done. So.
That's beautiful, that piece around education. And I think that's actually one of the powerful things about trans representation, because trans representation doesn't only benefit and reflect the lives of trans people, but it also gives a window and an entry point for non-trans people to also understand our experiences and learn a great deal. And so, especially with this being a children's book, what would you like non-trans kids to walk away from after reading this book or having this book read to them?
Well, there's a lot to learn. I mean, I think so many of us are not even taught that. I didn't know what the word I didn't have the word transgender in my vocabulary growing up. I didn't have the word cisgender in my vocabulary growing up. And so for some folks, this might be the first learning that trans folks exist and cisgender folks exist. And I think it's a great thing to see it for the first time in such a loving, triumphant way. So I think for some people, this will be the first time that you will see a family like ours. And then I think on a deeper level, I hope that people see, I hope it's a domino effect. There's this theory that trans folks are convincing other people to be trans folks, right? like the scary, different people are going to convince all of the quote unquote normal people to be different. And I've heard that before, it's a narrative that we're pushing on our children. And I will say this, if you're around my son, Penelope, and if you're around me, there will be things that we will encourage you to do, and that will be to be authentic. I think you can't be around Penel without thinking about who you are deep inside. So when I was raising Penel and I was watching him be so authentic, it actually encourage me to really stand up and think about who is this woman deep inside. I think she's more than just a 50-year-old mom. I think she's more than just female. And so, I hope that when you read Penel's story and you read the story of our family, it will encourage you to think beyond gender norms, but also think beyond how folks see you, think beyond your gender, think beyond your age. And it will spark something within you and within your family to find a deeper sense. I mean, the whole point, I think, for parents is to help our children puzzle out the deeper meaning of their lives. And so if the book can help you puzzle out the deeper meaning of your life, then that would be beautiful for me as an author.
The last comment I'll make, because I also want to give you some time to discuss some other things, but this is my jam right now. But the last thing I'll say is that I really loved the fact, kind of getting back to that notion of this is about love. That's also I took as the main message of this book, because I felt like this book transcended so much of like the capital T trans discourse. And so the word transgender does not appear in this book. And then there's also like a very slight discussion, or at least comment, that's made about pronouns, and Penelope just circumvents that altogether. And I love both of those things, because I feel like trans kids should get to be trans kids, right? And they should not be responsible for being ideologues. They should not be responsible for being pundits, or being commentators and social critics, and all this stuff that all this responsibility and apologizing that trans kids are made to do a lot. And so I love the fact that none of that was present here. And all of those adult features of capital T trans discourse, Penelope didn't have time for any of it, and I'm just here for Penelope and living.
Nailed it. I mean,
Mhm.
nailed it. Like, there's so many times when we've been asked to be on stage together or to speak together, and typically Penel's like, no, I'm good. I rather do homework. He's a straight A student. He graduated valedictorian. He's a basketball player. He did a lot of karate for years. And so most of the time, my children think what I do and what this adult conversation has, become is quite boring. My kids are like, are you still talking about that, Mama? Like, really? And so I have to explain to them that, like, until not only are the laws changed, but until there's a societal shift, until 300, I stopped counting, but in 2019, I think there was over 300 murders of trans folk, right? By cisgender folk. So until those things are changed, I will continue to have this conversation, this redundant conversation with adults. But my children, they are doing the things that they enjoy: math, science, manga, anime, travel, to see their families all over the world. And so I think, yeah, you're right about that. I'm glad you noticed that this is, when Penel says, I am a boy, he never used the word transgender. He's just telling me in a very plain and simple language that I had gotten the whole thing wrong, that I wasn't really seeing him for who he was. And folks have asked me, that could not be true. He couldn't have at 3 years old told you that. And that's deep, when we think that children at 3 don't know who they are, right? That's really deep. And that to me is part of the root of the issue, that we think as you get older, you know more about the interior life. Well, actually, Penel knew about his interior life from very early on, and I just had to listen to him.
So really quickly as well, can we also, because I'm sure there's some folks who aren't familiar with this book, and also I should also say the impact that this book has had. So can you tell us a little bit as well about your first book, the one that precedes this one, The Bold World?
So, before I actually wrote The Bold World, there was, our family had been going through what felt like a very difficult time. Not only was our child acting up for many years, and what looked like just total disruption. Penelope, for the first several years of life, was nail biting until bloody, reoccurring nightmares. Also had gotten to the point where Penel was bullying siblings and then friends at school, friends at the playground. I really wasn't sure what was going on. And so I tried to fix the issue, fix the problem, with more stories and more love and more hugs, longer naps. I even tried to fix it through diet. I thought maybe there's a dairy allergy, if you can believe it. I thought maybe Penelope's experienced a dairy allergy. If I just make the food clean, everything will be better. Long story short, 3 years into it, and it was only progressively getting worse. And so our family was really unraveling in many ways, because as a mom, when you can't settle your children, it is so disruptive to your own life, right? And so when I started to really get into understanding my kid, it took me into different communities, it took me into different peer groups, it took me into a lot of reading. And then I started to piece it all together, and I realized this is not a negative thing, this is a positive thing. And when I started to figure out that this was a positive reality to our family, I wanted to share that story. And so I first shared it in an article with Essence magazine. And then the next time I shared it on a large platform was with Cosmopolitan magazine in a video. So it was like a 10-minute video of our family, like a little mini. And we got like 11 million views in the first week. And that mini doc is now used in New York City for the state of New York for diversity training. That video helped me write the book, right? Because I'm a first-time author, but the publishers had seen that we had this audience of other families that were interested in us. So I wrote the memoir. Alice Walker gave me a beautiful review, and that was brilliant. I also have just received thousands of letters from parents and children and adults, some trans, some other, just saying thank you. And a lot of times they're from folks that are not dealing with or are not trans themselves or not raising a trans child, but they're just in the world raising folks that are different from themselves, right? So parents who have children who are different in some way, and they wanted to see how other families have done it. How we support diversity. Like this is a real diversity and inclusion experience. You know, that's like something we talk a lot about in our boardrooms and in our classrooms and in our offices, like being diverse and inclusive. But when you actually have to do that in your home and you can't get rid of a kid because they don't fit in, right? You have to actually include everyone. It is a learning process that you can never forget. So the book, you know, has for me, so I wrote the book several years ago, but now I speak on the book. I have the book with me and I talk about it. I did a TED talk with it. I've done keynote talks with it, just sort of pulling out some of the pieces, some of the chapters, some of the little stories that are in the book. If there's time, there's one recent story that I would love to share if there's a moment. Do you think now's a good time?
I think now's the perfect time, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm a writer, so I'm always kind of like notating and jotting down things and remembering, jotting down things so I don't forget the moment. And something happened last summer. So every summer I take my kids away and we stay in this rental, and we have a glorious, week by the water with family and friends. And we always leave something like a Lego piece or a swim trunk or a Monopoly board, and we never find it again. So this last summer, we went back into the same rental and I'm setting up the kitchen, which is like the hub. And I open up the silverware drawer and I find something that we left the year before. And the weirdest thing was I found like my children's Afro pick in the silverware drawer. And I know it's ours because it has the black fist of liberation and it has these long prongs. But the funny thing was, it was like, it had barbecue sauce all over it. I swear to you. And the black fist of liberation was melted down. And so like my mind was going like, wait a minute. So the family after us that rented it, they don't have Afros. They don't know this language because it's the whole language in my house. They don't know. And they were using it to toss a chicken over the grill. And that made me think, we really don't see each other. Like, particularly the dominant culture doesn't see the other life. So like when most of the time, like white folks aren't fully seeing Black folks, cis folks aren't fully seeing trans folks, straight is not really seeing the queer community. And I thought, if like our language of hair and liberation can be mistaken for a barbecue tool and stuffed in the wrong drawer, what is happening to not only the culture, but to the people that are being unseen and misunderstood and shoved into the wrong proverbial drawer. And so I thought, okay, we really have to see each other. And so now I'm really looking for everything I haven't seen. And I want people to tell me, oh, wait, you didn't get that one right, Jodie. Like, think about it another way. My whole like time is to see folks, to see people, not only my child, but like the millions of people that I had not even thought about. That's what my book is about. That's why I share so much of my life. That's why I give you such close proximity to my children in many ways, because I want you to see us. I think it's more dangerous if you don't see us. There is some vulnerability about sharing my life with you, because I definitely always get, nasty comments and on social media, but I think the benefit of giving you some proximity to us outweighs that. And so I hope that the language and the culture and the people that I'm raising is not forgotten. It doesn't go unseen.
Actually, let's continue with that notion of like marginalized communities not being seen. And so for anyone who's just coming in or didn't get to hear Jodie's introduction, Jodie also sits on the board, I believe, for the Human Rights Campaign, right?
Yeah.
Good, exactly. And so right now we are in a moment, of course, where trans people, particularly legislatively, are under attack. And just this year, we've seen such a slew of anti-trans, specifically anti-trans youth as well, bills submitted into legislatures, passed in legislatures. We've been battling some here in South Carolina. And so the HRC, of course, is one of the major LGBTQ organizations and advocacy centers in our country. So if you can you tell us a little bit about how you all are responding to these kinds of assaults and threats on trans people and trans youth, and also just what do you see as a vehicle? What do you see the HRC doing and contributing to these larger movements?
Thank you for asking about HRC. So I didn't, and because I'm always glad to say the name out loud, because it was not a name that I knew or I had heard about as an organization. I'd never heard of the Human Rights Campaign. And it was an organization that I needed in many ways. And I thought for many years that I just needed the Black community. I went to Spelman, my family's from the South. As I said, I was raised by activists, and in my upbringing, I was told, look, stay close to the Black community and stay close to women, like feminism and Black power. And that will take you, that'll be all you need, right? And then of course, life will switch up on you. And of course I have a trans child, and then where do I go? So over the years, I have over the recent years, I've worked with the Human Rights Campaign, which is our largest LGBT organization globally. A lot of what we're known for is our political muscle. So we have a way of lobbying against bills that we feel are unjust, and lobbying for bills that we feel are pro-equality. We help get elected officials that are pro-equality seen and visible and hopefully elected. We have been known to even help elect presidents, pro-equality presidents. And so there's a PAC and a super PAC, and there's a big, I would say political muscle that HRC has been flexing in the eye of equality, for equality. On the other side of HRC, and it's what's lesser known about the Human Rights Campaign, is that we have programs. And so I actually came in through the programs. There's a Parents for Transgender Equality Council of Parents, where we not only lobby, but we speak in public and we speak in small groups, and we sort of push the narrative to that our children are natural and healthy and important parts of the society. We have an HBCU program where we work with all of the major HBCU schools, and we help to foster environments that are safe for LGBT students in historically Black colleges and universities. We have faith-led programs, we have global programs. So there's like, HRC is sort of this big, I'd say, community, and we do political work, but we do also programmatic work in these small neighborhoods. It sounds like a lot, and I always say, just find community. And then if you're like, I saw in the chat, someone says, what do you suggest for trans folks who don't have supportive biological families? find community, find family. For me, I found it partially at HRC with other parents. I also found it on the board with folks that are committed to changing the laws. I think it's important to find community, and that's our responsibility, right? So when I told Penelope his responsibility was to go to school and talk to his friends, it's our responsibility as adults to find that community. For me, it was rooted in HRC, but it can be, you know, at your library, it can be at your local community groups.
All right. Lastly, before I hand it back over to our hosts, I just want to reiterate something really important, and you kind of brought this up when you were discussing your journey to the HRC. The name of this conversation, of course, is Let's Talk Race, and we've been talking about trans issues and trans liberation the whole time.
And that's separate, right, from me.
And so much of what I do is foregrounding the interdependency between these two parts of our social justice liberation struggle. And so can you just lastly, for the audience, just talk a little bit about what the relationship of trans liberation is to the larger conversation about race and racial justice?
Well, my conversations are always, you know, I'm asked to speak a lot, and I'm usually asked to speak on race and gender and identity and how they play out in family dynamics. And I have a hard time separating those three things: race, identity, and gender. And I'm sure academically, you know, we understand them to be different in ways and how they impact on us. But for me, I had to put language, I had to put an understanding to something I didn't understand or wasn't raised to understand, right? And so when I was thinking about my son, I had to put it in context for myself to make it sticky and to make it make sense. And so I started reading, again, The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. And it's about his relationship to America and how race played out for him in America. And so every time he wrote the word Negro in the book, I actually superimposed transgender and throughout the whole entire story. And it was not to compare Black folks and trans folks. It was really to compare oppression. And so when you look at oppression of Black folks, you look at oppression of Native folks or of women or of fill in the blank, the stories play out the same. There are a few people who are reshaping stories of entire people and peoples for their own benefit. And so when I could understand that, you know, that society was going to try to redefine me as something that they saw, and it was my job to say, no, 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 however you think you know me, I am this woman, I am this person. And so then if I can have that freedom to tell you who I am, then so can Penelope. It's just a human thing. I had to see this through a humanity that for me, I understand it through race because that's the generation I grew up in and those are the parents that raised me and the grandparents, but I had to apply that same knowledge of self-pride, but also of bias and put that in Penel's story. Otherwise, the word transgender was too big. I had never heard of it before, right? So I think when we look at race and gender and sexuality and identity, it's important to find something in that story that you can relate to, and then use that to puzzle out the deeper meanings for all of the other areas where there's bias. And so when we're looking at, so for me, racism, sexism, transphobia, it all smells the same, number one. Number two, you can't separate, you can't say, you know, Black rights are different from trans rights because of course there are a lot of Black trans folks. And the impact of being Black and then being trans on your humanity is so weighted that we'd be foolish to try to pick one over the other. It is a compounded issue. Unfortunately, or fortunately, the way America looks at us, it compounds all of these identities that are not dominant, which is white and rich. So anything that's not white and rich, it's compounding on top of each other to give a false story. And so I say, like, it's hard to pick them apart one at a time. And I'm just gonna obliterate all of that at one time and say, look, there's no room for a false story of my child You can't tell me that you know him to be an N-word, or you can't tell me that you know him as dangerous. I'm just gonna say he's Black, he's trans, and he's loved. So they all kind of, it's just the way, I don't know how to pick them apart. It's all one thing for me. I don't know if that answered your question, but it is something that I think.
Oh, that was, yes, thank you. All right, so I'm gonna invite folks from the audience to pose any questions that you might have for Jodie or myself or both. And we have one question, and if I don't see any after we go through this one, I will pass it back over to our hosts. So we have a question from Holly, and Holly asks, how would you advise parents to help non-trans children become less biased?
Yeah, it's a practice to, it's a practice to live together in our differences. And so when I'm allowing my children to have this discussion, this long form discussion, I call it labbing it out. And when I'm allowing one child to say, biologically, I don't understand, I don't believe that trans identities exist. And then I allow Pinnell to talk about his reality. This is long form conversation. So this is about how you get people to sit in the room with different identities and with different perspectives and with different truths. So it's not just about the kid who is cisgender bending over backwards to understand the trans kid. It's not just the trans kid bending over backwards. It is all of us sitting down and saying your truth, right? And so this is how we teach ourselves, adults included, to not be uncomfortable when we don't agree. So I think, a lot of times parents will they don't want to embarrass themselves. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want their children to say the wrong thing or something inappropriate. And I think you have to create safe spaces, right? So in my house, I have a safe space. It's on the floor and it's family members and we can just talk. And so as parents, you have to create safe spaces for all of the identities and realities to exist and to coexist. And then you have to demonstrate not being embarrassed, not being scared when something bumps up against your reality. So when my son says, I don't believe that trans identities exist, I can't get embarrassed. I can't shut him down. I have to give space for us to talk about it, because the goal is 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when these children are adults. So we're modeling for them patience. We're modeling for them, I'm not embarrassed if we don't agree. We're modeling for them, I'm not going to get angry or disruptive if we don't agree. We're just going to sit here and talk it out. So I think, you're going to have to give your family time. You're going to have to create safe spaces, and you're going to have to model being okay with differences. And that's big.
All right, well, I think that's the last question we have. So I will go ahead and throw it back over to our host, but I would just like to say, Jodie, thank you so much for spending this time with us. It was just so incredible just hearing a little bit more about you as a person, a little bit more about you as an author, your family, and just getting a richer context of this book that I appreciate so much. So thanks again for spending this time with us. And I think, Jocelyn, are you here to take it over from us?
Can I just add one more thing? I think that, when I'm thinking more about what can we do to, help our children see the world broader. I think I wanted to be more concrete than I was. So there's this idea of labbing out the ideas and putting every idea on the table in a safe space. But there's also, storytelling is a really important way to broaden our children's minds. And so pick up books and buy books that are about families that are different and communities that are different. And read those books at night to your children when their minds are really loose, right? Another thing you can do is have adults in your life, in your home, that represent a variety of types. So when I think about who came over to visit my parents, who my parents respected, those people imprinted on me. And so if you're only bringing folks that look like you and sound like you into your home, you are reiterating a narrative that there's only really one type of family that you, or one type of person that you approve of. I know that might not be the intent, but that's the message. And so I've had to really think about who I bring over to my house. And at one point I looked at my friends and I didn't see any trans people. I didn't see any gender nonconforming identified folks. And so I thought, this is BS. I am telling my children through my friend group that Penelope is the only trans person in the world that I accept. So I had to really look at that and say, okay, how can I, widen my friend group? That takes a lot of intention, because then you got to go into communities and create friendships over the course of a year that are outside of your community. But I will leave you with that you should, if you look at your friend group and it looks just like you're not doing the work, try to expand your friend group, figure out where the gaps are, and then specifically go into those communities through chat groups, through libraries, through, adult groups, and see if you can broaden your friend group to include those that you have not seen before. So that's my parting, hopefully a little bit of parting wisdom.
Yes, that's definitely some good wisdom and some wise advice. So thank you for leaving us on that note, Jodie. Thank you so much to both of you for being here with us today and for sharing everything about your work and the many thoughts and stories behind your work. And it was so good to hear from both of you. And I know the audience feels the same way. I'd also like to thank the event attendees for joining us this evening. And before we all go, I'd like to remind everyone to take a look at our website, richlandlibrary.com, for more information about other upcoming Let's Talk Race events, including the Let's Talk Race Family Book Festival featuring Nick Stone. Nick Stone is the author of Dear Martin, and that'll be this Sunday, October 24th at 3 p.m. We also have a teen event. It's Let's Talk Race Teen Book Group, and we're going to be discussing Dear Martin. That'll be Saturday, November 6th at 3 p.m. And we also have the Let's Talk Race community conversation with the Columbia Museum of Art. And that'll be Thursday, November 11th at 6:30 p.m. Registration is open for each of these events. So if you haven't registered, go ahead and do so. I also want to mention that we have a lot of other great programs coming up. So please check out richlandlibrary.com for a full schedule. And follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube to get notifications.
Oh, also, really quickly, Greg Green is in attendance, and I just want to say hey to Greg. Hey, Greg.
Yes, thank you for attending, Greg. So if you're interested in anything, go ahead and register, take a look at our website, and thank you again for joining us this evening, and enjoy the rest of your evening.